This lecture is entitled Primary Research, Conducting Interviews Responsibly. We're going to talk about important considerations when conducting primary research in ethnographic interviews. As we've mentioned in other talks, primary research is a super powerful tool and one that we want you to take full advantage of. But we do want you to be aware of research-related questions, ethical considerations, legal considerations, and professional obligations that come along with doing this kind of work. So let's talk first about research. Students have often asked in the past, are primary research and ethnographic interviews considered human subjects research? And if so, don't I need to go through an institutional review board or an IRB, as it's sometimes referred to? And this is a great question as it comes up because we are in the realm of design thinking and the realm of human-centered design, and we want to make sure that we are engaging with those human beings responsibly. But the answer is that this work is not considered human subjects research for really three reasons. You're not doing enough interviews to constitute a statistically significant sample size. So really your work can't be considered academic research in that sense. It's also considered a technique that you're learning for a class. So that is excluded usually from an IRB. It's also usually excluded from an IRB because this kind of research bears much more similarities to market research than it does to formal academic research or studies. And so for all these reasons, it is highly unlikely that you would need to go through an IRB for this class. There may be times when you do need to go through an IRB. Those times are when you really want to make generalizable conclusions about your work. You would also want to consider going through an IRB if you really absolutely knew that you wanted the class interviews you conducted to be part of a larger body of generalizable research. You'd also want to go through an IRB or think about going through an IRB if your innovation is potentially a novel treatment or a novel approach to treatment. In any of these cases, it's really important that you reach out to your professor and have a discussion with them about whether or not you should investigate going through this process. I want to talk a little bit about generalizable research so that you understand what that really means and what it's really asking. So generalizable research is a formal term, and it's the kind of work we do in academic settings when you want to test a new approach or treatment and demonstrate its efficacy. So these are things like clinical trials or randomized controlled experiments. You also might do it for a new technology or a novel approach if you want to prove that it does not cause harm. One thing that's really important to note is that if you do not do this kind of research, you cannot say that your research shows or this will work for you in your population. You have to be conservative in the assertions that you make about your work. So it's really important that you consider how you contextualize your work in an academic or professional setting. And again, if you have any questions about this, you can always reach out to your professor and ask. Now, this might be kind of making you think, well, is this primary research stuff then just a waste of time? Absolutely not. It's incredibly useful. And in fact, I've heard multiple students say it's the most useful thing that they did throughout the entire capstone process. The reason why is that primary research helps us test our ideas. It helps us learn about our problems and our users. It helps us make much more grounded design decisions that are much higher quality. It can signal our openness to other ideas and prove that we know how to do hard work in pursuit of our ideas. The feedback that we get from primary research interviews can be used to justify our approach, and it can also be suggestive of research approaches, so it really can contribute to academic knowledge overall in the long run. And actually, primary research can really be sufficient to secure funding or support. We don't necessarily have to have that academic level of validation. However, it is important to know what kind of level of support your funders or sponsors are looking for and what proof do they require, and that again, you make sure you're contextualizing your work in appropriate settings. So let's talk a little bit about ethical considerations. We're dealing with vulnerable or protected populations. These interviews may not be research, but they do still involve people. And in particular, for social workers, often our users are potentially clients or people who may be part of a vulnerable or a protected population. And as such, they require extra sensitivity. Vulnerable and protected populations, just to refresh, include but are not limited to minors, trauma victims, incarcerated individuals, or people experiencing mental illness or impaired cognitive function. If you think you may be working with this population or someone who is from a vulnerable or protected population, and especially if you think that they will be the user or the beneficiary of your intervention, please reach out to your professor as soon as possible for special instructions before making contact for any interviews. Let's turn now to some legal considerations. First of all, you are allowed to gather some personal information about the primary interviewees that you speak with. It really is supposed to be information that's considered public, such as their name. It could include a business address, a phone number, what organization they work for, their title, and their email address. However, there is information that's personal that you cannot and should not ever gather. These include ID numbers, financial account numbers, private handles, such as they might use for different computer websites or interfaces, or other information that could otherwise be correlated to them from just reading your paper. Another topic that comes up is the anonymity, and you may absolutely speak with experts or users on condition of anonymity or partial anonymity. You may, for example, want to say, I promise not to share this outside of my program or outside of my course. When you do want to keep this input anonymous, you can and should substitute some kind of descriptive information just so we can keep the interviews clear and distinct. So if you were interviewing me, you might say, well, this was university professor number 3. Or if you interview a student, you may say that's student number 1. Just again, so you have a clear parameter of who's who. There are issues of professional responsibility and liability that may come up. And to be fair, this is in pretty rare instances. But you may have questions about the legal or professional responsibilities, obligations, or risks that you're taking on. And if you do, again, please come and ask me or your professor any questions that you may have. We can help work through university channels to get you answers if you need them. Some things that you want to keep an eye out for that may kind of indicate that you potentially have some liability issues is that if you think there's any risk of potential harm from engaging with your population. If you think, for example, that the people that you're speaking with or working with, that some kind of action that you take may actually change the trajectory of actions that they take as a result. So as a result of your influence, the outcome is different because they made different choices. That's one instance where you may say, hey, there's a potential consequence of liability, especially if you think that that change in actions could result in a poor trajectory of some kind. You may also just have questions about the rules of engagement. We know that not all of you are trained or licensed social workers, and so you may want to understand how to conduct yourself in keeping with the general professional responsibilities. Again, our door is always open. We take the responsibilities of doing primary research very seriously. And so we are always available to you. So please do see your professor if you have any questions or concern about any of these issues may be a problem for you. We also want to talk about professional obligations, specifically because many of you are licensed clinical social workers. You have obligations and you have a professional code of ethics. We encourage all students, regardless of whether or not you are a trained social worker, to read the social work code of ethics and adhere by them. If you have other professional obligations as well, you should act in accordance with best practices, restraints, and cautions of the social work profession or of your profession. Again, if you ever have any questions or you think that there are conflictory obligations, let us know and we'll do our best to help you resolve them. There are also resources that organizations like the NASW offer you if you're a member of their organization. So feel free to leverage their hotline and other resources as well in an effort to try to make sure that you're truly conducting your work in the best possible manner. Sensitive issues may arise, or you may identify sensitive issues after the fact. So let's talk about this a little bit. It's unlikely and possible that information of a sensitive nature may be disclosed to you, or in very rare instances may be triggering for you or the participant, or if you are a licensed clinical social worker, may require you to take action such as reporting abuse or neglect, or you may feel that as an extension of your work in the program that you would like a social worker to help you report things that you heard. You may also have sensitive situations that in reflection you have questions about. If any of these situations arise, please connect with your professor or program administrators as soon as possible. If for any reason you are not comfortable approaching your course professor, you're welcome to approach me and I will share my information at the end of the talk. Or even if for any reason you're uncomfortable approaching me, please find a professor, potentially a clinical professor that you respect, or approach the program administrators and make sure that you get your questions answered. Everyone in the program and in the DSW really does take this issue seriously, and we want to make sure that you have the help that you need. So please don't be afraid to seek support however you may need it. Again, we also just want to emphasize that if you are a licensed clinical social worker, please do follow the best practices of your profession. And again, we're here to help get clarification if any is needed. Again, just to circle back, while these interviews are not research, as we noted, they still involve people, and in particular may necessitate engaging with vulnerable or protected populations. You may also hear about work that your students are doing in class. So just a cautionary note to please be careful to engage with respect, protect confidentiality wherever possible, and above all, do not coerce participation or otherwise engage unethically as part of this interview process or work for this course. So again, our advice is to generally please operate with caution and consideration of these issues. As I've mentioned, hopefully multiple times, and if that's the one thing you take away, please know that we are all absolutely committed to helping you. I'm the course lead, and as such, I'm always available to you to discuss these important questions. Again, my name is Stephanie Wander, and I'm reachable at swander@usc.edu. Again, that's swander as in I wander around at usc.edu. And you can also get me at my phone number, 310-877-6224. Though email is my preferred method of communication. If you put primary research in the header, I will make sure that I get back to you very, very quickly and we get you the support that you need. Thanks so much for your time and attention. This is an important conversation, and I hope it helps put you at ease about doing these interviews.